One of the places where we can see Shinran's ideas is in his Shoshinge that we just chanted earlier. I think there's a particular passage in the Shoshinge that seems to, I would say, encourage a kind of different perspective about our experiences of loss, about our experiences of difficulty, about the truth of impermanence. And I think this bigger perspective is, this different perspective is actually a bigger perspective. And so today I'd like to discuss this passage in the Shoshinge and what this bigger perspective might be. First, a little heads up. Since I'll be discussing the Shoshinge, this talk might seem to kind of evolve into more like a classroom talk than a typical Sunday sermon. But, however, like me, maybe you also came into this temple as a native English speaker and are interested in knowing something about why the Shoshinge occupies such a prominent place in our services, including our Shosuki service today. So the passage that I will discuss is one where Shinran is praising Tanwan, or Donran. Donran is Tanwan's name in the Shoshinge. Tanwan is one of the 7 masters that are on the scroll over there on the far left side of the altar. There are 7 esteemed teachers, Pure Land teachers, that make up these 7 masters that Shinran highlights in the Shoshinge. So this is a image of the 7 master scroll that you can see over there on the far left side of the altar. Tanwan is the 3rd master of the 7. And personally, I think it's significant that Tanwan is the only one that has his own line. Of course, that's probably just a coincidence, but I feel it's significant. And a few years ago, the temple's Wednesday night study class looked in detail at Tanwan's contributions to Pure Land thought. And suffice it to say that according to various Pure Land scholars, it's virtually impossible to account for the profound depth of Shinran's thought without acknowledging the contributions of Tanwan. And now I'd like to discuss the closing lines of Shinran's praising of Tanwan. So this is optional, but if you'd like to follow along, you can turn to page 30 of your service book. I'm going to be just discussing the first 4 lines there, so if you'd like to follow, don't worry, we won't be chanting it, we'll just be looking at it. So if you're on page 30, the first 2 lines, Wakuzen Bonbu Shinjin Ho, Shochi Shoji Sokune Han. In these lines, Shinran is pointing out that Tanwan clarified the fundamental Buddhist teaching, and actually particularly the Mahayana Buddhist teaching, that when sentient beings, even ordinary, defiled and confused sentient beings, that when they receive Shinjin, or awakening, they will realize that birth and death, in other words, difficulty, impermanence, and samsara, that these are all, in fact, simply nirvana itself. That's pretty deep. But this is essential Mahayana Buddhism, which transcends all dualities. You could say that the manifestation of dualities is a manifestation of our being human and having ego. That's why Mahayana Buddhism talks about awakening the sense of transcending all dualities. And then in lines 3 and 4, Hishi Muryo Ko Myo Do Sho U Shujo Kai Fu Ke. Shinran is sharing here Tanwan's insight about what sentient beings do when they attain Shinjin or awakening. And here you can see the translation there. I think that's D.T. Suzuki's translation, but I prefer Hisao Inagaki's translation, which is similar, but which reads, "After they unfailingly reach the land of infinite light, they will save sentient beings everywhere." So says Tanwan. Now, first of all, I think you can get the sense here that reaching the land of infinite light, or birth in the Pure Land, is not referring to finding oneself in some faraway paradise. Shinran is highlighting an essential point that Tanwan made, which is that birth ultimately means awakening. Birth refers to a spiritual birth, or spiritual transformation that takes place in our mind in the awakening experience. So according to Tanwan and Shinran, to be born in the Pure Land means receiving Shinji, or awakening. But secondly, of course, there are many ways to understand Shinji or awakening, but I'd like to highlight what I think is the deep significance of that last statement by Shinran, quoting Tanwan, that awakened beings will save sentient beings everywhere. This is another very deep thought, but in a nutshell, what this means is that attaining awakening and saving sentient beings, in other words, working for the benefit of other beings, that these two things are inseparable. Inseparable. One cannot truly attain awakening. One cannot transcend all dualities, all separation, without also naturally being motivated to work for the benefit of others. Now, it's interesting here that in discussing Tanwan in the context of all the seven masters, there are various Shin scholars that have pointed out that unlike the other masters, Tanwan does not seem to have a doctrinal error. In fact, these scholars have pointed out that actually Tanwan is not given much attention by the two Chinese masters who followed him, nor by the two succeeding Japanese masters, but that then suddenly he springs into prominence when Shinran, 500 years after Tanwan, quotes him extensively in Shinran's magnum opus, the Kyogyo Shinsho. So here in this diagram by the Shin scholar Hisao Inagaki, if you look at this diagram, you will note the solid arrow connecting Tanwan to Shinran there in the lower right corner, but the dotted arrow connecting Tanwan to Dao Cho, the fourth master. So if you look at this chart, let me clarify. I don't know if you can see it in the text in the back row, but let me clarify that this is like a flow chart of the Pure Land lineage, if you will. And it starts not with Shakyamuni Buddha, but with Amida Buddha. Why? Because in Shinran's view, Shakyamuni was not only the historical Buddha of 2,500 years ago. In Shinran's view, he was actually a manifestation of Amida Buddha, or a manifestation of the ultimate reality of the Dharma itself. And then secondly, Professor Inagaki's chart also illustrates Tanwan's key role in uniting the two main Mahayana schools of Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu. But in terms of Tanwan's influence on Shinran, this chart reflects that the masters who followed Tanwan, you can see there on the right, Dao Cho, Shandao, and Honen, all shared a preference for the Contemplation Sutra. And of course, as we all know, Shinran always acknowledged Honen as his teacher, so there is a solid arrow connecting him to Honen. You can see in the lower right corner the the last two blocks there, Honen and Shinran. However, Shinran did not emphasize the Contemplation Sutra. Instead, Shinran emphasized the larger sutra. And in the interpretations of what are many of the core tenets of the Pure Land tradition, teachings in the larger sutra, these are all directly traceable to Tanwan. And just another factoid, if you will, it's not a coincidence that the Ran character of Shinran's name comes from the Ran of Donran, Tanwan's name in Japanese. And now, before concluding my talk, I'd like to share a memorable story about Tanwan. And I hope you're okay. Before concluding my talk, I'd like to share a memorable story about Tanwan, and it also concerns that Shoshinge passage that I've been discussing, and particularly what might be the origin of those last lines, those lines that state that those who attain birth in the Pure Land will save sentient beings everywhere. Actually, this story is also in the Shoshinge. If you look in, I quoted the passage on page 30, but if you look maybe 2 or 3 stanzas before that, this story is mentioned by Shinran also. This is a story about Tanwan. So Tanwan, as a young man, Tanwan had been suffering from a serious illness, and he had become obsessed with seeking a way to extend his life through studying not the Buddhist teachings, but the Taoist teachings. However, as the story goes, one day he happened to meet the great Pure Land Buddhist master, Bodhiruchi, and he asked Bodhiruchi for guidance on how to extend his life. Bodhiruchi was a true teacher. And so what Bodhiruchi did is he sternly scolded Tanwan and pointed out his inherent selfishness, and instead gave him Pure Land scriptures. And the story says that Tanwan then burned his Taoist text and took refuge in the Pure Land teachings. I'd like to share an interpretation of this famous story by another Shin Buddhist scholar who is Dr. Alfred Bloom. I think you will see that Dr. Bloom's interpretation really brings out the significance of this story of Tanwan's life. The significance of this story lies in the contrast it draws between the natural desire of people for material and physical immortality and the religious focus on a truly spiritual immortality. Even in our own time, the issue of death is widely discussed. Modern people, like the ancient Taoists, go to great lengths to prolong their lives. While it is natural to want to maintain life, and it is very difficult to imagine our own death, religion challenges us to develop a deeper perspective on this problem. The issue of life is not its quantity or length, but its quality and its meaning. The physical extension of life, even to 100 years of age, does nothing to address the egoism and delusions that create our problems and threaten the meaning of life. True immortality in Buddhism lies in the new spiritual life which arises when egoism has died. In this connection, a major influence of Tanwan's teaching on Shinran was his emphasis that the real goal of religious life was the salvation of all beings, not merely oneself. According to Tanwan, when we attain birth in the Pure Land, we become a Buddha and work for the salvation of all. Shinran highlights this aspect of Tanwan's teaching in the Shoshinge. Thus, religion is not to be an exercise in egoism, but an antidote for it. Tanwan made the principle of benefiting others the essence of Pure Land faith. End quote. So I really appreciate Dr. Bloom's clarification the significance not only of this Tanluan story, but of course the influence of Tanluan on Shinran. And of course, I should clarify that, you know, when Tanluan and Shinran are talking about saving others or benefiting others, they're not referring to us doing so through any kind of self-power, right? But it's done by the working of the power of the Dharma through us. Actually, this is the teaching of Tariki or other power. And yes, this is yet another example of the influence of Tanluan on Shinran, because this is Tanluan's teaching. So one last point is that, you know, although I've been highlighting the Shoshinge passage on Tanluan, the truth is the bigger picture of this is that in the Shoshinge, Shinran expresses his indebtedness to all 7 masters. And in fact, what ties all the masters and Shinran together is that they are all part of the Mahayana. Mahayana means great vehicle. They are all part of this Mahayana vehicle, which is the branch of Buddhism that our Jodo Shinshu tradition is part of. And the Mahayana not only, of course, treasured Shakyamuni and Shakyamuni's attainment of awakening, or his attainment of nirvana, but they also deeply appreciated Shakyamuni's lifelong wish to share this awakening with others. And so in this sense, Shakyamuni exemplified this principle of benefiting others. In conclusion, I just wanted to say that this principle of benefiting others, I think, is a manifestation of that bigger perspective that I mentioned in my opening. If we recall what Dr. Bloom had stated, that this bigger perspective is the new spiritual life which arises when egoism has died. I think we can understand the essence of this bigger perspective. Ultimately, this bigger perspective is one that arises from an awareness which is necessarily beyond our egoism and beyond our limited views. I think we could say that this bigger perspective is appreciating the essential non-duality and the essential oneness of all life. This is the wisdom that Tanluan, Shinran, and all our great teachers are trying to lead us to. And this is what makes this Shotsuki service a very special opportunity for me personally, and I hope for you also. Thank you very much for listening. Namo